My daughter forgot to hang up the phone. I heard, "It's time for him to go to a nursing home. He's a burden." I didn't say anything, but at that moment, something in me broke. I sold the house for $890,000. They came back from a business trip, smiling, but there was a surprise waiting for them. The keys did not fit the door. They found a note on the doorstep, and after reading it, they started screaming. And then I realized they wouldn't just leave it alone. This was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The phone rang just as I was scraping the last of the meatloaf from my plate. Ellen's meatloaf recipe, though mine never tasted quite right without her touch. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled despite myself. Caitlin. "Dad, how are you holding up?" Her voice carried that familiar warmth that always made my chest tighten with love and loneliness. I settled into Ellen's old recliner, the leather worn smooth from years of her evening reading sessions. "Oh, you know me, sweetheart. Just finished dinner and was about to watch the news." I didn't mention it was leftovers from 3 days ago, or that I'd been staring at Ellen's photo on the mantel for the better part of an hour. "Are you eating enough? You know you can always order groceries online now, right? I showed you the app." "I'm eating plenty," I interrupted gently, "though I had a little scare yesterday. Forgot to turn off the burner under my coffee pot. Good thing I smelled it burning from the living room." There was a pause. I could picture her frowning in that way she'd inherited from her mother, the same little crease between her eyebrows. "Dad, maybe we should talk about getting someone to check on you more regularly. Jeremy thinks—" "I'm fine, Caitlin. Really? How's your business trip going? You're in Phoenix, right?" "Yes, the conference ends tomorrow. Jeremy's been handling most of the client meetings while I sit through these endless presentations about digital marketing trends." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Listen, Dad, I should probably get going. Jeremy and I have dinner plans with some potential investors." "Of course, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too, Dad. Take care of yourself, okay?" I heard a click, then rustling sounds. She must have dropped the phone in her purse, I thought, reaching to hang up my end. But then I heard voices, muffled but clear enough through her phone's microphone. "Jeremy, you see how he's deteriorating?" Caitlin's voice, no longer warm and caring. "He forgot to turn off the stove yesterday. What if he burns the house down?" My hand froze on the receiver. Ice spread through my chest. "It's time for a nursing home, Caitlin." Jeremy's voice cold and matter-of-fact. "He's becoming a burden, and you know it. Your dad's a good man, but he can't live alone anymore." "The house is worth almost $1 million now." Caitlin's tone had shifted to pure calculation. "With Denver's market, we could probably get 900,000, maybe more." "Exactly." Jeremy sounded pleased. "We could sell it, put him somewhere decent, not too expensive, and finally buy that house in Boulder we've been looking at, the one with the mountain view." My daughter laughed, actually laughed. "God, Jeremy, you should have seen him tonight. So grateful just to hear from me. He has no idea we're planning this. The longer we wait, the more confused he'll get. We should strike while he still trusts us completely." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor Ellen and I had installed together 23 years ago. Every board laid by my own hands, every nail driven with thoughts of our family's future. I sat in the sudden silence of my empty house, staring at Ellen's photograph. Her eyes seemed to bore into mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Warning? Or maybe just the terrible knowledge that comes to those who've already left this world. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Ellen's anniversary gift to me 15 years ago, ticked steadily in the growing darkness. Outside, the first spring crickets began their evening song in the garden Ellen had planted, and I still tended. Something cold and hard settled in my chest, replacing the warmth I'd felt hearing my daughter's voice just moments before. My hands, weathered from decades of construction work, slowly curled into fists. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was confused, helpless, ready to be managed and discarded. They were already spending my money, already planning their new life in my grave. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't nearly as confused as they believed. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, Ellen's face watching me from the silver frame on the end table. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves had heard my daughter's betrayal and were holding their breath. My legs felt unsteady when I finally stood to turn on the lamp. The warm light fell across the living room we'd furnished piece by piece, each item chosen with care and saved for with sacrifice. The burgundy sofa where Caitlin used to curl up doing homework, the coffee table I'd built in the garage, sanding it smooth while she played at my feet. I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept old receipts and papers. My fingers found the folder I was looking for without conscious thought. 20 years of financial records I'd never thrown away because Ellen always said, "You never know when you might need them." University of Colorado. Tuition receipts. $48,000 over 4 years. I remembered those double shifts, coming home with concrete dust in my hair and plaster under my fingernails. Ellen would have coffee waiting and would massage my shoulders while I paid bills at this very kitchen table. "Roy, you're working yourself to death," she'd said one night, watching me calculate how to afford Caitlin's spring semester. "She deserves better than we had, Ellen. She's smart enough for anything." Ellen had kissed the top of my head. "Just don't give her so much that she forgets to be grateful." I should have listened. God, I should have listened. The wedding receipts were in there too. $32,000 for one day. I'd told Caitlin we could afford 5,000, maybe 8 if we stretched. But she'd cried, actually cried, about wanting her dream wedding. I'd worked weekends for 6 months, installing hardwood floors for a contractor friend who paid me under the table. "Daddy, you're the best father in the world," she'd whispered during our dance, her head on my shoulder, her wedding dress rustling against my rented tuxedo. I'll never forget this. But she had forgotten. Just like she'd forgotten who co-signed her first car loan when her credit wasn't good enough. Just like she'd forgotten who made the calls to get her that marketing job when she was unemployed for 8 months after graduation. I found the bank statements from 2 years ago, after Jeremy lost his financial advisor position for reasons they never fully explained. They'd moved in temporarily, just until Jeremy found something new. I'd never charged them rent. I'd paid the increased utility bills, bought groceries for 3 adults instead of one lonely widower. Jeremy would pat my shoulder and call me the most generous man in Colorado. Caitlin would hug me and say, "Dad, we'll pay you back when we get on our feet." They'd been on their feet for over a year now, both working good jobs, both making more money than I ever had. But they'd never mentioned moving out, never mentioned paying me back. The anniversary dinner I'd paid for last month, $200 at that fancy steakhouse downtown, because Jeremy said they deserved to celebrate. The car repair bill I'd covered when Jeremy's BMW needed a new transmission, $3,000 that cleaned out my emergency fund. "Roy's like a father to me," Jeremy had told his friends at their last barbecue, his arm around my shoulders. "I'm so lucky to have married into this family." I'd been proud, actually proud to be the generous father-in-law, the man who took care of his family, no matter what it cost him. I walked upstairs to Ellen's and my bedroom, still unchanged after 2 years. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, her reading glasses folded beside the lamp. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept our important papers and pulled out our original house deed. Roy and Ellen Hayes. Purchased 1999. No liens, no co-signers, no complications. My name only, now that Ellen was gone. Standing there in the bedroom where Ellen had spent her last days, surrounded by everything we'd built together, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp as broken glass, but underneath it something harder was forming. They wanted to put me away and sell my life's work. They thought I was too old, too confused, too grateful for their attention to fight back. I looked at Ellen's photo on the nightstand, remembering her voice from all those years ago. "Don't give her so much that she forgets to be grateful." Well, Ellen, our daughter had definitely forgotten, but she was about to remember that her old man wasn't as helpless as she thought. I walked to my home office and pulled out the business card I'd kept in my desk drawer for 3 years. Todd Fisher, real estate attorney. Ellen had insisted we meet with him after her cancer diagnosis, just to make sure our affairs were in order. It was time for another consultation. The next morning I walked through my house like a stranger seeing it for the first time. But instead of seeing home, I was seeing what Caitlin and Jeremy saw: square footage, market value, liquid assets. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the granite countertop I'd installed myself, working by lamplight after my regular job, because we couldn't afford to hire contractors. Ellen had picked out the pattern, speckled gray with veins of gold that caught the morning light. She'd made coffee on this counter every morning for 16 years, until the cancer took her strength away. I remembered the Christmas morning when 3-year-old Caitlin took her first wobbly steps right here, from the refrigerator to Ellen's outstretched arms. We'd both cried with joy, Ellen scooping our daughter up and spinning her around while I scrambled for the camera. "Our baby's walking in our house," Ellen had whispered, tears streaming down her face, "in the house we built for her." The living room held 25 years of Christmas mornings. I could still see 7-year-old Caitlin's face lighting up at the sight of the dollhouse I'd spent 3 months building in the garage, working in secret after she'd gone to bed. Ellen had sewn tiny curtains for the windows, made miniature furniture from cardboard and fabric scraps. "Daddy, it's just like our house," Caitlin had squealed. And it was. I'd made it a perfect replica, down to the little bay window in what represented her bedroom. That bay window had cost me 6 months of overtime. Ellen had seen it in a magazine and fallen in love with the idea of reading there in the afternoons. I'd learned to cut angles I'd never cut before, measured and remeasured until my back ached from crawling around the frame. "Roy, we can't afford this," Ellen had worried when she saw me marking measurements on the wall. "You want it, you'll have it," I told her. "I'll make it work." I climbed the stairs to Caitlin's old room, still painted the soft yellow she'd chosen for her 16th birthday, still decorated with photos of her high school friends and college memories. The room where I'd rocked her through colicky nights as a baby, where Ellen and I had helped her with algebra homework at the small white desk I'd built to fit perfectly under the window. The master bedroom was the hardest. Ellen's side of the bed still had her water glass on the nightstand, her bookmark still marking page 247 of the novel she'd never finish. I'd built these walk-in closets with my own hands, custom designed to fit Ellen's height perfectly. Her clothes still hung there, still smelling faintly of her perfume. This was the room where we'd planned our future, where we'd whispered about our dreams for Caitlin, where Ellen had died holding my hand while machines beeped around us. "Promise me you won't let them take advantage of you," she'd said near the end, her voice barely a whisper. "You're too good, Roy. Too generous. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." I'd promised, but I hadn't kept that promise, had I? In my home office, I found the folder of construction photos Ellen had kept. Pictures of me laying the foundation in the spring of 1999, 25 years younger and 50 pounds stronger. Me and my crew installing the frame, Ellen in her hard hat bringing us lemonade on hot summer days, her belly just starting to show with Caitlin. The financial records from those years told the story Ellen's photos couldn't. Second mortgage. Personal loan from my brother. Ellen taking a part-time job at the school district to help with materials costs. We'd eaten beans and rice for months, drove cars held together with prayer and duct tape. But we'd built this house with our sweat, our sacrifice, our love for each other, and for the family we were creating. And now my daughter, the baby who'd taken her first steps in this kitchen, the child who'd played in the yard I'd landscaped by hand, wanted to sell it all and put me away like an inconvenient piece of furniture. I picked up Todd Fisher's business card from my desk drawer. The edges were worn from 3 years of handling, but the phone number was still clear. Caitlin and Jeremy thought they were dealing with a confused old man who'd be grateful for any scrap of attention they threw him. They thought I was weak, helpless, ready to hand over my life's work without a fight. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I dialed Todd's number and listened to it ring, my hand steady as stone. Outside, the spring morning was bright and clear, the kind of day Ellen used to love, the kind of day for new beginnings. The law offices of Fisher & Associates occupied the second floor of a modest brick building on Colfax Avenue, the kind of place that specialized in helping regular people with real problems rather than impressing corporate clients. I'd chosen my best suit, the charcoal gray one Ellen had picked out for me to wear to her funeral, and arrived 15 minutes early, my hands only slightly trembling as I signed in at the reception desk. Todd Fisher was younger than I'd expected, maybe 55, with graying temples and the patient demeanor of a man who'd heard every family horror story twice. His office was lined with law books and family photos, a wife, 2 teenagers, a golden retriever. The kind of normal life Ellen and I had tried to build. Mr. Hayes, good to see you again. Todd poured coffee from a small machine in the corner, the rich smell filling the space between legal documents and filing cabinets. I remember you and Ellen from a few years back. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I accepted the coffee, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I need to discuss something delicate about my daughter and son-in-law. Todd settled behind his desk, pen ready. I'm listening. I told him everything. The phone call, the overheard conversation, their plans to sell my house and put me in a nursing home. Todd's expression never changed, but I caught him shaking his head slightly when I described their eagerness to spend my money on their Boulder dream house. Unfortunately, Mr. Hayes, this scenario is more common than you'd think. Todd set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Adult children often assume they know what's best for their aging parents, especially when valuable assets are involved. But they can't actually do anything, can they? I mean, legally. Let's start with the basics. The house is titled in your name only since your wife's passing, correct? That's right. Ellen and I owned it jointly, but when she died, it transferred to me automatically. Then, legally speaking, your daughter and son-in-law have absolutely no claim to your property. They cannot sell it, cannot force you into a care facility, cannot make any decisions about your assets without your explicit consent. Todd pulled a legal pad from his drawer and began making notes. The house belongs to you, period. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something sharper. So if I wanted to sell it myself, you could put it on the market tomorrow if you chose to. It's your property, your decision. Todd looked up from his notes. May I ask why you're considering that option? I thought about Caitlin's laugh when she'd called me a burden, about Jeremy's cold calculation of my worth, about 25 years of sacrifice reduced to a real estate transaction. They think I'm helpless, confused. They think they can manage me like a piece of property. My hands clenched around the coffee cup. Maybe it's time I showed them exactly how sharp my mind really is. Todd was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Denver's housing market is incredibly strong right now, especially in your neighborhood. Properties are selling within days, often for cash offers above asking price. He paused. If you were serious about selling quickly, before your daughter and son-in-law return from their trip, how quickly could it happen? With the right buyer, and there are plenty of investors looking for properties like yours, we could have a sale completed within a week, maybe less. Todd leaned forward. But Mr. Hayes, this is a major decision. Once you sell, there's no going back. I built that house with my own hands, Mr. Fisher. Every board, every nail, every custom detail, I know exactly what I'm doing. We spent the next hour discussing practicalities, market value estimates, cash buyer networks, legal requirements. Todd explained that he could have everything prepared within 24 hours if I was serious about proceeding. The consultation fee is $200, Todd said as I prepared to leave. If you decide to move forward, that applies toward my legal fees for the sale. I paid in cash, feeling more clear-headed than I had in months. Walking to my truck in the spring sunshine, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Caitlin's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since her betrayal, I smiled. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I could picture her in some hotel lobby in Phoenix, probably checking her watch, wondering why her grateful old father wasn't jumping to answer her call. Let her wonder. Let her and Jeremy make their plans about my future, my house, my life. They were in for the surprise of their lives. The phone kept ringing as I climbed into my truck, Todd Fisher's business card secure in my wallet, and a plan forming in my mind that would teach my ungrateful daughter exactly who she was dealing with. I had built my life from nothing once before. I could certainly tear it down and rebuild it on my own terms. The phone finally stopped ringing, but I knew she'd call back. She always did when she needed something from the old man. This time she was going to get much more than she bargained for. By the time I reached my driveway, confidence had replaced the tremor in my hands. Todd Fisher's words echoed in my mind. It's your property, your decision. 25 years of doubt and second-guessing had lifted like Denver fog in the morning sun. I was unlocking my front door when the phone rang again. Through the window, I could see it buzzing against the kitchen counter where I'd left it. Caitlin's name glowed on the screen, and for the first time since her betrayal, I smiled. Let her stew for a moment. Let her wonder why her grateful old father wasn't scrambling to answer. I poured myself a glass of water, took a deep breath, and picked up on the sixth ring. "Dad, there you are!" Caitlin's voice practically sparkled with artificial enthusiasm. "I was starting to worry when you didn't answer earlier." "Sorry, sweetheart. I was out running some errands." I kept my tone warm, grandfatherly. "How's Phoenix treating you?" "Oh, you know how these business conferences are. But listen, I have the most wonderful news." She paused for dramatic effect. "Jeremy and I have been planning something very special for you." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles going white. "Oh?" "We want to treat you to a vacation. You deserve some rest and relaxation after everything you've been through since Mom died." Her voice carried that practiced sympathy I now recognized as manipulation. "There's this beautiful place we found. It's like a resort, but with medical staff on hand, just in case you need anything." A resort with medical staff. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. You really didn't need to go to such trouble for me." "Nonsense. Your family." Jeremy's voice came through the background. He must have been listening on speakerphone. "We've already made all the arrangements." "When were you thinking?" I managed, knowing full well they wanted me gone before they returned to claim their inheritance. "Well, we should be back by next Friday," Caitlin said. "We were hoping you could be ready by then. Just pack some clothes and personal items. You know, the essentials." The essentials. Not the photo albums Ellen had lovingly arranged. Not the furniture I'd built with my own hands. Just the essentials for an old man being shuffled off to die. "Actually, Caitlin, I have a surprise for you too when you get back." "Oh, Dad, what kind of surprise?" She sounded genuinely pleased, probably imagining I'd signed papers or made their job easier somehow. I walked to the bay window I'd built for Ellen, looking out at the garden she'd planted, the porch swing where we'd spent countless evenings planning our future. "It's something I've been working on since our last conversation. I think you'll be very surprised." "You're so sweet, Dad. We'll talk about everything when we get home, okay? Get some rest, and we'll take care of everything else." Sweet. She called me sweet while planning to steal my life. "I will, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too, Dad. See you Friday." The line went dead, and I set the phone down with hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. I walked to my home office and opened my laptop, the screen glowing to life with possibilities I'd never considered before. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before I typed, "Real estate agents, Denver." The search results filled my screen like ammunition in a war I was finally ready to fight. I'd always been methodical. 25 years as a construction engineer had taught me to research thoroughly before making any decision. Tonight, that methodical nature would serve a different purpose. I clicked through agent profiles, comparing success rates and client testimonials, like I used to compare structural steel suppliers. Cherry Hills, Highlands Ranch, University Hills, neighborhoods where houses sold for the kind of money Caitlin and Jeremy were already spending in their dreams. One name kept appearing in the top results: Brian Connor, 43 years old, specialized in quick sales, averaged 18 days from listing to closing. His photo showed a professional smile and confident eyes, the kind of man who could make things happen fast. His testimonials were exactly what I needed to see. Brian sold our house in 6 days. Cash buyer lined up within 48 hours. Smooth closing, no complications. I stared at his direct phone number, prominently displayed beneath his credentials. This was it, the moment that would set everything in motion. Once I made this call, there would be no going back to being the grateful, manageable old man my daughter expected. Ellen's photo on my desk seemed to be watching me. I could almost hear her voice. "Roy, are you sure about this?" I was sure. More sure than I'd been about anything since her funeral. I dialed Brian Connor's number with steady fingers. "Brian Connor, Connor Real Estate. How can I help you?" "Mr. Connor, my name is Roy Hayes. I'm interested in selling my house quickly. How fast can these things actually happen?" "Well, Mr. Hayes, that depends on several factors. But with the right property and pricing strategy, I've closed deals in as little as 10 days with cash buyers. What kind of timeline are you looking at?" 10 days. My heart hammered against my ribs. 10 days? That fast? Absolutely. Denver's market is incredibly hot right now, especially for well-maintained properties in established neighborhoods. Can you tell me a bit about your house? I looked around my kitchen, seeing it through a buyer's eyes for the first time. Two-story, 3,400 square feet, built in 1999, Cherry Creek area, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. I've maintained it well, did most of the work myself over the years. Brian's voice sharpened with interest. That sounds exactly like what several of my investors are looking for. Original owner, well-maintained, established neighborhood. Those are premium selling points. Would you be interested in a property assessment? How quickly could you come by? I can be there this afternoon if you're available. Say 3 o'clock? I glanced at the clock. It was just past noon. 3 o'clock works perfectly. Let me give you the address. After I hung up, I sat in the sudden quiet of my kitchen, the magnitude of what I'd set in motion beginning to settle in my chest. In 3 hours, a stranger would walk through the house Ellen and I had built together, assigning dollar values to our memories. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning obsessively, old habits from Ellen's time when she'd insist the house be spotless for any visitor. I dusted the bay window, straightened the throw pillows on the couch, made sure every surface gleamed. But this cleaning felt different. I wasn't preparing for guests. I was preparing for an execution. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my shirt, took a deep breath that carried the scent of Ellen's lavender sachets, still tucked in the linen closet, and walked toward the front door. My hand trembled slightly as it closed around the brass doorknob I'd installed myself 15 years ago. Beyond this door waited either my salvation or my damnation. I turned the handle and opened the door to my future. Brian Connor looked exactly like his photo, professional but approachable, early 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of successful deals. He carried a leather portfolio and tablet, and the moment he stepped inside, his eyes went wide. Wow! He stopped in my entryway, his gaze traveling up the crown molding I'd installed by hand to the hardwood floors Ellen and I had selected together. Mr. Hayes, this is exactly what I was hoping for. I watched him take in the details, the way the afternoon light streamed through Ellen's bay window, the seamless flow from living room to dining room that I'd achieved by removing a load-bearing wall and installing a beam. His appreciation was genuine, professional. You weren't kidding about maintaining this place. He pulled out his tablet and started taking photos. These hardwood floors throughout, original? Installed them myself in 2001. Ellen wanted something that would last, so we went with 3/4-inch solid oak. I found myself falling into the familiar rhythm of discussing my work, proud despite everything that was happening. And this kitchen... Brian stopped at the granite countertop, running his hand along the edge. Custom installation? Every inch. Ellen picked the pattern, said the gold veining reminded her of sunlight. My voice caught slightly. I spent 3 weekends getting the measurements perfect. Brian was typing notes on his tablet, photographing the custom cabinets, testing faucets and outlets with the thoroughness of someone who knew what buyers wanted. Mr. Hayes, I have to be honest with you. In my 15 years doing this, I rarely see properties maintained to this standard. I'm an engineer, was an engineer. I believe in building things right the first time. It shows. He gestured toward the living room. May I? I nodded, following him as he admired the open floor plan, the built-in bookcases flanking the fireplace, the way Ellen's decorating choices had turned our construction project into a home. This bay window, custom work. Built it for my wife. She wanted a reading nook. I could picture her there with her mystery novels and afternoon tea, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Brian was taking measurements now, his excitement barely contained. Mr. Hayes, I need to show you some comparable sales. He pulled up listings on his tablet. Similar properties in this area have been selling for $850,000 to $920,000. My chest tightened. That was more than Caitlin and Jeremy had estimated in their cruel conversation. But given the condition and custom features of your home, I'm thinking we price it at $890,000. That should move it quickly while getting you top dollar. $890,000. I sat down heavily in Ellen's reading chair, the numbers spinning in my head. That much? I managed. Mr. Hayes, you're sitting on a gold mine. Properties like this don't come on the market often, especially not in this condition. Brian's voice carried the confidence of someone who knew his business. I actually have an investment group that's been looking for exactly this type of property. What kind of investment group? They specialize in high-quality rental properties in established neighborhoods. They pay cash. No financing contingencies. No repair negotiations. They can close in 10 business days. 10 business days. Caitlin and Jeremy would return from Phoenix in 8 days, expecting to find their grateful, manageable father ready to be shipped off to their resort. What's the catch? Why so fast? Brian smiled. No catch. Cash means no loan delays, no appraisal contingencies that could kill the deal. They do their own inspections, but frankly, your house is in better shape than most new construction I see. I looked around the living room where Caitlin had taken her first steps, where Ellen and I had hosted Christmas mornings and birthday parties and quiet Sunday afternoons, reading the paper together. When would I need to be out? Standard contract gives you 30 days after closing, but they're flexible if you need more time. The main thing is getting clear title and completing the paperwork. I thought about Caitlin's voice on the phone, calling me sweet while planning to steal my life. I thought about Jeremy's cold calculation, reducing me to a burden to be managed. I thought about Ellen's warning about being too generous, too trusting. Let's do it. Brian's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine excitement. Excellent choice, Mr. Hayes. Let me call them right now. I watched him dial, heard him describe my property with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found buried treasure. Cherry Creek area, original owner, immaculate condition, custom features throughout. He ended the call with a broad smile. They want to move forward immediately. I can have the initial contracts ready by tomorrow morning. The sun was setting through Ellen's bay window, casting golden light across the room where I'd just agreed to sell 25 years of my life. But for the first time since that devastating phone call, I felt something that had been missing for too long. Control. How does 9 a.m. sound? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I realized Brian was waiting for an answer that would change everything. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Ellen's 15th anniversary gift to me, ticked steadily in the silence. 9 a.m. sounds perfect. After Brian left with promises of contracts and closing timelines, I stood alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else. The evening light through Ellen's windows painted everything golden, like a photograph of a life I was about to leave behind. But it wasn't sadness I felt, it was anticipation. Brian arrived the next morning with contracts, a notary, and coffee for everyone, the kind of professional efficiency I'd always respected. I read every line with the thoroughness that had made me a good engineer, checking details the way I used to check blueprints. Sale price, $890,000. Cash purchase. Closing date, 10 business days from signing. The notary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, walked me through each signature. Minimal contingencies, just the title search and final walkthrough. And I can remain in the house for 30 days after closing if needed? That's correct, Mr. Hayes, though most sellers prefer to move out sooner rather than later, just for peace of mind. Peace of mind? I almost laughed. The only peace of mind I'd have would come from seeing Caitlin and Jeremy's faces when they discovered what their burden had done. I signed my name with steady hands, and just like that, the process was in motion. The first 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and inspections. The title company began their search through decades of records. The investors sent their team, a polite crew who admired my workmanship and found nothing to complain about. Your father-in-law really knew what he was doing, one of them told the heir, since they assumed I was already gone. These floors, this electrical work, all top quality. Days 4 through 6, I became a man with a secret mission. I researched apartments online, looking for something small but comfortable, somewhere I could start over with nearly $900,000 in the bank. I found a place in Highlands, a senior community with golf courses and a community center, the kind of place Ellen and I had sometimes talked about for our golden years. I also called storage facilities, planning which of Ellen's things I'd keep and which I'd have to leave for the new owners. Her china, definitely. Her jewelry box, the photo albums, the essentials of a life lived together. Days 7 through 9 brought a strange confidence I hadn't felt in years. Each morning I woke up knowing I was one step closer to freedom, one step closer to showing my daughter that her confused old father was sharper than she'd ever imagined. Mrs. Patterson from next door noticed the activity, asked about the inspectors and official-looking people. Just some work being done, I told her, hating the half-truth, but knowing the full truth would spread through the neighborhood before I was ready. On day 8, Brian called with final confirmation. Everything's on track for tomorrow's closing, Mr. Hayes. The buyers are thrilled with the inspection results. Wire transfer will be completed the same day. You'll have access to funds immediately. That night, I packed a single suitcase with clothes and personal items, not because I was moving yet, but because I wanted to be ready for anything. I looked at Ellen's photo on our dresser and whispered, I hope you understand what I'm doing. Friday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of spring day Ellen used to say was Denver at its finest. I dressed carefully in my best suit, not the funeral suit, but the navy one Ellen had bought me for Caitlin's college graduation. The title company office was all professional efficiency and congratulations. The buyers were represented by their attorney, a sharp woman who double-checked every document. Brian handled the paperwork like a conductor, leading an orchestra. Mr. Hayes, if you'll sign here, and here, and initial there. Each signature felt like cutting a chain. The deed transfer, the settlement statement, the final acknowledgement that 1247 Maple Street no longer belonged to Roy Hayes. And this is your wire transfer confirmation. $890,000, less closing costs, has been deposited to your account. I stared at the numbers on the paper. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. More money than Caitlin and Jeremy had dreamed their burden could access. We shook hands all around, everyone pleased with the smooth transaction. Brian walked me to my truck, promising to stay in touch if I ever needed real estate services again. You made the right choice, Mr. Hayes. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what we need. I drove home through neighborhoods I'd known for 25 years, past the elementary school where Caitlin had learned to read, past the park where Ellen and I used to walk every Sunday morning. But instead of nostalgia, I felt liberation. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my truck, looking at the house that was no longer mine. The keys to the front door felt heavy in my palm, but tomorrow I'd hand them over to the new owners and walk away from this chapter of my life. Caitlin and Jeremy were due back from Phoenix in 3 days. They'd arrive expecting to find their grateful, manageable father ready to be packed off to their resort. Instead, they were going to find an empty house and a lesson they'd never forget. I climbed out of my truck and walked toward my front door, reaching for my phone to make the next call in a plan that was working better than I'd ever hoped. The engine ticked as it cooled in my driveway, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. I sat staring at the house I'd built with my own hands, the house that now belonged to strangers, the house where Caitlin and Jeremy expected to return and find their grateful, manageable father waiting to be shipped off. The keys to the front door felt like lead in my palm. New owners or not, I still had access for 30 days, time enough to complete what I'd started. I drove to the Starbucks on Colfax Avenue and parked in the lot, hands steady as I dialed directory assistance for a 24-hour locksmith. The urgency fee would cost an extra $200, but money was no longer a concern. AAA Emergency Locksmith, this is Eddie speaking. I need all my door locks changed today. It's urgent. What kind of time frame are we looking at, sir? As soon as possible. I can pay cash. I can be there in 2 hours. Address? Back at the house, I waited for Eddie in my truck, watching Mrs. Patterson water her garden next door. She waved and I waved back, my chest tight with the knowledge that I was lying to everyone who cared about me. Eddie arrived in a van full of tools and hardware, a man in his 50s who'd clearly seen every kind of lock emergency Denver had to offer. Security issue, sir? He asked, studying my front door. New ownership situation. Better safe than sorry. He nodded like he'd heard it before and got to work. I watched him remove the locks I'd installed 15 years ago, the brass hardware Ellen had picked out because it matched our door knocker. These are quality locks, Eddie commented as he worked. Somebody knew what they were doing when they installed them. That was me. I like things done right. The new locks were silver instead of brass, modern instead of traditional. They clicked differently when Eddie tested them, a sharper, more mechanical sound than the old ones. Here are your new keys, sir. 3 copies of each, front door, back door, and garage side entrance. Eddie handed me a ring of keys that felt foreign in my palm. That'll be $450 with the emergency fee. I paid in cash from my wallet, knowing there would be no paper trail connecting Roy Hayes to this transaction. After Eddie left, I stood in my empty house and began the hardest part, packing 25 years of life into what I could carry. Ellen's jewelry box went into my suitcase first, along with our wedding photos and the novel she'd been reading when she died, bookmarks still marking page 247. My engineering certificates, our important documents, Ellen's favorite cookbook with the handwritten notes in the margins. I left almost everything else. The furniture that told our story would have to stay. The photo albums chronicling Caitlin's childhood. Ellen's clothes, still hanging in our closet, still carrying the faint scent of her perfume. While I packed, I called Sunset Manor Apartments on my phone, explaining that I needed a furnished one-bedroom immediately. "We have a lovely unit available for immediate occupancy," said Mrs. Chen, the property manager. "Month-to-month lease if you prefer flexibility." "I'll take it." I met Mrs. Chen at the apartment complex an hour later, a modest but clean building designed for seniors, with a community center and well-maintained grounds. The one-bedroom unit was simple but comfortable, furnished with everything I needed to start over. "Cash deposit is perfectly fine, Mr. Hayes. When would you like to move in?" "Tonight." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't ask questions. I signed the lease and handed over first month's rent plus deposit, nearly $3,000 that would have seemed impossible to spend casually just 2 weeks ago. Loading my car in the gathering dusk, I caught Mrs. Patterson watching from her window. She waved again, and I felt the weight of all the relationships I was severing, all the connections Caitlin and Jeremy had forced me to cut. I took one last walk through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing differently now that the house belonged to someone else. In the kitchen, where Ellen had taught Caitlin to bake Christmas cookies. In the living room, where we'd watched Caitlin open presents on Christmas morning. In our bedroom, where Ellen had taken her last breath while I held her hand. "I'm sorry, honey," I said aloud to Ellen's memory, "but you'd understand. You always said I was too generous for my own good." I locked the new locks and drove away from Maple Street for what might be the last time, my rear-view mirror full of the life I was leaving behind. The sun was setting when I arrived at Sunset Manor, my car loaded with the essentials of my existence. I carried my suitcase to my new front door, fumbling with unfamiliar keys to unfamiliar locks. Inside the small apartment, I dropped my suitcase and immediately reached for my phone. The final phase of my plan required one more call. One more piece of the puzzle that would give Caitlin and Jeremy the surprise of their lives. The apartment felt like a motel room, functional but soulless, with generic furniture and the lingering smell of industrial carpet cleaner. I stood holding my phone, Ellen's photo already positioned on the nightstand, trying to decide which bank would best protect nearly $900,000 from the children who thought they deserved it. I opened my laptop on the small dining table and began researching banks that specialized in large deposits. Colorado Community Bank caught my attention, smaller than the major chains with a focus on personal service and discretion, exactly what I needed. "Colorado Community Bank, Private Banking Division. This is David Morrison." "Mr. Morrison, my name is Roy Hayes. I need to open an account for a substantial deposit, around $890,000. The brief pause on the other end told me David was recalculating his day. "We'd be absolutely delighted to work with you, Mr. Hayes. When would be convenient for a consultation?" "Monday morning, 9 a.m.? "Perfect. I'll have everything prepared." The weekend stretched ahead of me like uncharted territory. I'd never lived anywhere but the house Ellen and I built together. This tiny apartment felt like exile. But it was exile by choice. My choice, not theirs. Saturday morning, I made coffee in the unfamiliar kitchenette and methodically unpacked my belongings. Ellen's jewelry box on the dresser, my engineering awards on the bookshelf, our wedding photo beside the bed where I'd sleep alone in a space that had never known Ellen's presence. I drove to the grocery store and bought food for one person. Simple meals, nothing that required the kind of cooking Ellen had loved. The checkout clerk, a young man with kind eyes, asked if I was new to the area. "Just moved in," I told him, starting fresh. Sunday morning, I discovered a coffee shop called Brews and Views, 3 blocks from my apartment. The barista, a young woman named Sarah with purple streaks in her hair, made the kind of strong coffee I preferred. "You're new around here," she observed, not prying, just friendly. "Retired engineer," I said, "looking for a quieter life." "Well, you've found the right neighborhood for that. Most of our customers are pretty mellow." I sat by the window with my coffee, watching people walk dogs and push strollers, living the kind of normal Saturday morning that Ellen and I used to treasure. But instead of sadness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. Monday morning, I dressed in my best suit and drove to Colorado Community Bank. David Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of professional warmth that came from handling people's life savings. "Mr. Hayes, what brings you to Colorado Community Bank?" "I recently sold my house. I need a fresh start with an institution that values personal relationships over transaction fees." David nodded with genuine understanding. "We specialize in exactly that kind of service. Tell me about your needs." I explained my situation carefully. A widower who'd sold his family home and needed secure, accessible banking. David asked thoughtful questions, never prying beyond what was necessary for account setup. "I'll need to wire the funds from my previous bank," I explained. "No problem at all. We can initiate that transfer today, and the funds should clear by Wednesday." David prepared the paperwork with quiet efficiency. Online banking, debit card, and checkbook, all standard services. Given the amount, I'd also recommend our premium account package for additional security features. I signed documents that made me an official client of Colorado Community Bank, customer number 847293, with access to nearly $900,000 that Caitlin and Jeremy would never see. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in the strange rhythm of my new routine. Morning coffee at Brews and Views. Sarah remembered my order and asked about my weekend. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood, discovering a small park with benches where other retirees fed pigeons and read newspapers. Wednesday afternoon, David called with the news I'd been waiting for. "Mr. Hayes, your funds have cleared successfully. Your account is fully active." I hung up and looked around my small apartment, at Ellen's photo watching me from the nightstand, at the simple life I was building from the wreckage of my daughter's betrayal. For the first time since Ellen's death, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. Wednesday evening, I sat in my single chair. Not Ellen's reading chair, not the recliner where I'd heard Caitlin's betrayal. Just a plain chair in a plain room that belonged entirely to me. I opened my laptop and typed "mini surveillance cameras" into the search bar. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, knowing that what I was about to order would capture the final act of my revenge. Caitlin and Jeremy were returning on Friday, expecting to find their grateful old father ready to be managed. Instead, they were going to discover that their burden had become their biggest problem. The search results filled my screen with dozens of surveillance options, from obvious security cameras to devices disguised as everyday objects. After 30 minutes of research, I found what I needed: a wireless mini camera hidden inside what looked like a phone charger. The specifications were perfect for my engineering mind: Wi-Fi enabled with smartphone app control, motion-activated recording, 12-hour battery life, and crystal clear video quality. Most importantly, it could stream live footage directly to my phone from anywhere with internet access. I ordered it with expedited shipping, paying the extra $40 to guarantee Thursday delivery. The total cost was $149, an amount that would have made me hesitate 2 weeks ago, but barely registered now. With the camera ordered, I turned to the next crucial element: the note that would explain everything to Caitlin and Jeremy when they discovered their keys no longer worked. The first draft was too angry, too raw with the pain of their betrayal. The second was too cold, missing the personal devastation they'd caused. By the third draft, I found the right tone: dignified but devastating, loving but final. I wrote in my careful engineer's handwriting, the penmanship Ellen had always admired: "Dear Caitlin and Jeremy, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked perfectly. I heard your phone conversation about putting me in a nursing home because I'm becoming a burden. I heard you calculating how much money you'd make selling my house. The house has been sold for $890,000 cash. The money is safely in my new bank account, where it will stay. I've moved to a place where I'm appreciated, not tolerated. Don't worry about me. worry about your own housing situation. Your belongings have been packed and are being stored at Denver Moving and Storage on Colfax Avenue. You have 30 days to claim them before storage fees begin. I gave you everything I had for 42 years. You repaid me by planning to warehouse me so you could steal my life's work. I hope the lesson was worth the cost. Love, Dad. Thursday morning, the FedEx truck arrived at my apartment with a small box containing my surveillance equipment. I spent an hour in my kitchen testing the device and learning the smartphone app. The video quality was remarkably clear, the audio sharp enough to catch whispered conversations. Thursday afternoon, I drove to my former house for the last time. I used the garage door opener I'd never given Caitlin and Jeremy, parking inside to avoid questions from neighbors. My hands shook slightly as I approached the front door with my new keys. Inside, the house still smelled like home. Ellen's lavender sachets, the lemon oil I used on the wooden furniture, the faint residue of 25 years of family dinners. But there were new additions that made my chest tight. Caitlin and Jeremy's suitcases by the stairs, their mail scattered on the kitchen counter, evidence that they'd been treating my house as their personal storage facility while planning my exile. I positioned the camera charger by the front door outlet, angling it perfectly to capture anyone entering. The view through my phone app showed the entire entryway, including the spot where I planned to hang my note. I tested the motion detection, walking in and out of frame until I was satisfied the system would capture every moment of their return. Then I taped the envelope to the inside of the front door at eye level, where they couldn't possibly miss it. Standing in my living room one final time, I touched the mantel where Ellen's photo had sat for 23 years. The new owners would put their own family photos there, create their own memories in the rooms Ellen and I had filled with love. "It's done, sweetheart," I whispered to Ellen's memory. "Justice served." I locked the house with my new key, tested the camera feed one more time from my car, and drove back to my apartment. The motion detector was armed, the battery fully charged, and my phone ready to alert me the moment Caitlin and Jeremy discovered their keys no longer worked. Back in my apartment, I sat in my chair with my phone in my hand, watching the empty doorway through the camera app. The timestamp showed 6:30 p.m. Thursday evening. Tomorrow, Caitlin and Jeremy would return from their business trip, probably discussing their nursing home plans and already spending my money in their minds. They had no idea their grateful old father had become their worst nightmare. I woke Friday morning with the anticipation of a man about to witness justice after years of injustice. My coffee tasted better than it had in weeks, and even the small apartment felt less confining as I settled into my chair with my phone, the camera feed showing my empty former doorway. 4:30 p.m. They should arrive soon. I'd memorized their travel patterns. Caitlin always insisted on leaving Phoenix by noon to avoid traffic, and Jeremy drove exactly the speed limit. They'd be pulling into my driveway within the hour. I looked at Ellen's photo on my nightstand. "I hope you understand what I'm doing, honey." They left me. No choice. 5:15 p.m. My phone buzzed with motion detection. A black SUV, Jeremy's car, pulled into the driveway of my former house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the screen. Caitlin stepped out first, stretching after the long drive. Jeremy emerged from the driver's side, pulling their suitcases from the back. They moved with the casual confidence of people coming home to claim their inheritance. I watched them approach the front door, Caitlin fishing her keys from her purse, while Jeremy set the luggage down. She inserted her key into the lock I'd had changed just yesterday. The key didn't turn. Caitlin frowned, examining her keyring. She tried again, jiggling the key with growing frustration. "That's weird," her voice came through my phone's speaker. "My key's not working." Jeremy stepped closer, his expression shifting from tired to concerned. "Let me try the back door." I watched him disappear around the side of the house, while Caitlin continued struggling with the front lock. When Jeremy returned 3 minutes later, his face had darkened with alarm. "Back door's locked too, and the garage remote isn't working?" His voice carried the edge of panic I'd hoped to hear. "Caitlin, someone changed these locks." "What? That's impossible. Dad doesn't even know any locksmiths." Jeremy studied the front door more carefully, his financial advisor's mind recognizing trouble when he saw it. "These are brand new locks. This isn't an accident." Caitlin pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. "I'm calling Dad." I watched her dial my old landline, the number I'd had disconnected 3 days ago. After several rings, her face crumpled with confusion. No answer. It's not even going to voicemail. Try his cell phone. He doesn't have a cell phone, remember? We talked about getting him one for emergencies. Her voice cracked with the first hint of real fear. Jeremy was examining the windows now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. There, that one's unlocked. I can boost you up. I watched my daughter climb through the kitchen window I deliberately left unlatched, her business suit catching on the frame. She disappeared inside, and moments later the front door opened from within. Jeremy entered with their suitcases, and both of them stopped dead when they saw the white envelope taped to the door at eye level. Caitlin's hand trembled as she pulled down the envelope with her name and Jeremy's written in my careful script. I leaned forward in my apartment chair, phone clutched in both hands, as she tore open the seal. Her eyes moved across my words, Jeremy reading over her shoulder. I watched their faces change, confusion to shock, to disbelief, to horror. He sold the house? Caitlin's voice rose to a near shriek. How could he do this to us? Jeremy snatched the note from her hands, reading it again as if the words might change. That manipulative old bastard. He was playing us the whole time. $890,000, Caitlin was crying now, her careful makeup streaking down her cheeks. He kept it all. That money was supposed to be our future. Your future, Jeremy snapped, his mask of devoted son-in-law finally slipping. This is your father, Caitlin. You should have handled this better. My fault? She whirled on him, years of suppressed resentment boiling over. You're the one who said he was becoming a burden? You're the one who pushed for the nursing home. Well, he was a burden. Look what he's done to us. Jeremy gestured wildly around the room that was no longer theirs. We're homeless. Our lease expires next week. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They were fighting in my living room about being homeless, just as they'd planned to make me homeless in their nursing home. Call a lawyer, Caitlin said desperately. There has to be something we can do. He can't just sell the house without telling us. With what money? Jeremy's voice dripped with contempt. In case you forgot, I lost my job 6 months ago, and your marketing salary barely covers our car payments. Then get another job? Where? Do you think financial firms are lining up to hire advisors who got fired for questionable transactions? I watched my daughter's face crumble as she realized the full scope of their situation. No house, no inheritance, no savings, and Jeremy's unemployable status finally revealed. How could he be so cruel? She whispered. The same way you were cruel when you called him a burden and planned to warehouse him. Jeremy shot back. The old man was smarter than both of us. Through my phone screen, I watched them collapse into my old furniture that would be gone tomorrow when the new owners took possession. Caitlin buried her face in her hands, while Jeremy stared at my note, with the expression of a man who'd finally understood he'd been outplayed. I turned off the camera feed. I'd seen enough. Walking to my small kitchen, I opened the bottle of Ellen's favorite wine I'd saved from the house, a 2018 Bordeaux we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came. I poured myself a glass and raised it toward Ellen's photo. To you, my love, justice served. The wine tasted like victory. They learned what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably Caitlin trying to reach me through some new method. I deleted it without reading and powered off the phone completely. Walking to my window, I looked out at the Denver skyline painted gold by the setting sun. Somewhere across the city, my daughter and her husband were facing the consequences of their cruelty. Somewhere in my former house, they were learning that their burden had become their biggest problem. For the first time in 2 years, since Ellen's death, I felt completely free. I was no longer anyone's burden. I was my own man again, with my own money, my own choices, and my own future stretching ahead like an open road. Roy Hayes had left the building, and he was never coming back. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching. While reading my son's will, my daughter-in-law hissed ominously, "You won't get anything out of the $70 million." The lawyer read the will, not a word about me, only her triumph. But suddenly a man ran into the room and shouted, "Don't believe them, it's a conspiracy." My daughter-in-law began to get nervous, her face contorted. You won't believe what happened 5 minutes later. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The phone rang sharp through the afternoon silence, cutting through my peaceful Tuesday like a blade through silk. I set down the Tribune's business section and reached for the receiver, expecting another telemarketer or maybe Jimmy calling about our weekend golf plans. Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Richardson from Northwestern Memorial. The voice carried that careful, professional tone doctors perfect for delivering terrible news. I'm sorry to inform you, but your son Ronald passed away today at 1:15 p.m. The newspaper slipped from my lap, pages scattering across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves. My hand gripped the receiver so tight my knuckles went white. Passed away. The words bounced around my skull without landing anywhere that made sense. What do you mean passed away? My voice sounded foreign, smaller than it should. He was responding to treatment. You said the new protocol was working. Sir, I understand this is shocking. The cancer had spread more aggressively than we anticipated. He went peacefully, with minimal pain. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Minimal pain, as if that mattered now. As if anything mattered now. The grandfather clock in the corner kept ticking its steady rhythm, oblivious to the fact that my world had just collapsed. Through the window, cars moved down Oak Park Avenue like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I hung up without saying goodbye and stared at the silent phone. Ronald was gone. My brilliant, stubborn, idealistic son who'd built a tech empire from his garage was gone. The boy who'd once spent 3 hours explaining why capitalism needed ethical guidelines was gone. My legs felt unsteady as I stood. I needed to call Vivian. She had to know. Maybe she could explain this away, tell me the doctor was wrong, that this was all some horrible mistake. I dialed her number with shaking fingers. It rang twice before her voice answered, bright and casual. Marvin? This is unexpected? I could hear salon noise in the background. Hair dryers humming, women chattering. She was getting her nails done while her husband lay dying. Vivian, I just got a call from Dr. Richardson. My throat felt raw. About Ronald? The background noise suddenly seemed louder, more obscene. How could she be at a spa when our son was fighting for his life? When our son was... Yes, he's dead. Her voice cut through my thoughts like a scalpel, clinical and cold. And before you start with your grieving father routine, let me make something crystal clear. You won't get a penny of the $70 million. Everything Ronald had is mine now. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. She knew. She'd known he was dead and hadn't called me, hadn't called his father. And her first thought, her only thought, was money. Are you serious right now? Heat flooded my chest, pushing up through my throat. My son just died, and you're talking about money? My husband just died, she corrected, her tone sharp as broken glass. And unlike you, I understand what that means, legally. Ronald's will is very clear about who inherits what. The afternoon shadows had grown longer while we'd been talking. The house felt different now. Emptier, like all the air had been sucked out. Photos of Ronald at various ages stared down at me from the mantel. Graduation day, his wedding, the last Christmas before his diagnosis, when he'd still looked healthy. How can you be so cold? I whispered into the phone. How can you be so naive? She shot back. This is the real world, Marvin. Money doesn't wait for grief. I stared at the receiver after she hung up, listening to the dial tone. In the span of 20 minutes, I'd lost my son and discovered the true nature of the woman he'd married. The woman who'd stood beside him in churches and hospitals, who'd promised to love him in sickness and in health. The clock kept ticking. Traffic kept moving outside, and somewhere in a cold hospital room, my son lay still while his widow calculated her inheritance at a nail salon. I set the phone down carefully and looked around my empty house. Tomorrow there would be funeral arrangements and lawyers and all the brutal machinery of death. Tonight there was just this crushing silence and the terrible knowledge that the woman who'd taken my son's name had never deserved it. My finger hovered over the redial button. Rage was building in my chest, hot and purposeful. Vivian thought she could dismiss me, dismiss Ronald's memory, with her talk of wills and money. She was about to learn otherwise. My finger pressed redial with deliberate force. The rage had settled into something harder now, more focused. Grief could wait. This couldn't. The phone rang once before she answered, her voice still carrying that casual confidence. "What now, Marvin? How dare you think about money when my son just died?" The words exploded out of me, years of watching her manipulate Ronald compressed into pure fury. "How dare you?" "Your son was my husband," she interrupted, voice rising to match mine. "And everything he built, everything he earned, everything he suffered for, it's all mine now, not yours. Mine." I paced across the living room, my free hand clenching and unclenching. The photos on the mantel watched me like silent witnesses. Ronald at 10, gap-toothed and proud of his science fair trophy. Ronald, at 25, arm around Vivian on their wedding day, both of them glowing with what I'd foolishly believed was love. "You didn't even call me," I said, my voice dropping to something darker. "Your husband died, and you went to get your nails done instead of calling his father." "I had appointments." Her tone was dismissive, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Besides, what was the point? You would have just rushed to the hospital and made a scene. I handled it professionally." "Professionally?" I stopped pacing. "He was your husband, not a business transaction." "Everything is a business transaction, Marvin. That's something you never taught him, but life did. Ronald learned to think like a businessman in the end. That's why his will is so comprehensive." There it was again. The will. She kept coming back to it like a vulture circling carrion. I thought about Ronald during his final months, how withdrawn he'd become, how he'd stopped taking my calls as often. I'd attributed it to the cancer, the treatments, the depression that comes with facing mortality. But maybe it had been something else. Maybe he'd finally seen through her mask. "You couldn't even pretend to grieve for 5 minutes," I said. "Grief is a luxury I can't afford. Do you have any idea how much debt the treatments left us in? How much money we spent on experimental procedures and private doctors and flying to Switzerland for some miracle cure that didn't work?" Her voice was getting shriller. "I sacrificed everything for him, and now I'm going to collect what I'm owed." "What you're owed?" The words tasted bitter. "You abandoned him. I saw how often you visited during chemotherapy. I counted the days between your hospital appearances. I was protecting our assets. Someone had to think practically while you and Ronald were playing out some tragic father-son fantasy. Someone had to ensure there would be something left when the medical bills were paid." The line went quiet, except for our breathing. Through the window, I watched a neighbor walking his dog. The ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon, continuing while my world burned down. That dog probably showed more loyalty than the woman on the other end of this call. "You never loved him," I said finally. "Love doesn't pay bills, Marvin. Love doesn't secure futures. Love is what naive people believe in before life teaches them better." Her voice had gone cold again, surgical. "Ronald figured that out, eventually. Why do you think he rewrote his will 3 times in the last year?" The words hit like a physical blow. 3 times. Ronald had been planning something, changing something, and I'd been completely unaware. How many conversations had I missed? How many signs had I ignored while focusing on treatment schedules and doctor appointments? "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a realist. And tomorrow at the funeral, you'll see exactly how realistic I can be." "Don't even think about challenging me, old man. I have lawyers you can't afford, and documentation you can't dispute." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the dead phone, my ears ringing with her words. The house felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Outside, the neighbor had disappeared around the corner with his dog, leaving the street empty. I slammed the phone down hard enough to make the end table shake. A photo of Ronald's college graduation fell over, and I reached out to straighten it automatically. His young face smiled up at me, full of hope and certainty about the future. He'd been so proud that day, so eager to change the world through technology and ethical business practices. The silence stretched out around me, heavy and expectant. Tomorrow I would have to face her again in public, while we buried my son. She would stand there in expensive black, playing the grieving widow while calculating her windfall. She would accept condolences from people who had no idea what she really was. But tonight, in this quiet house full of memories, I made a promise to that young man in the graduation photo. Vivian Bennett thought she had won. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains like it had every day for the past 15 years, but today everything felt different. I lay still for a moment, letting yesterday's reality settle into my bones again. Ronald was gone. Vivian had shown her true colors, and today I would have to face both truths in public. I sat up slowly, joints protesting the movement. Sleep had been elusive, filled with fragments of phone calls and memories of Ronald as a boy. The house felt impossibly quiet, without the possibility of his weekly check-in calls. No more, "Hey Dad, how's retirement treating you?" No more updates about his latest business ventures or complaints about experimental treatments. The coffee maker gurgled to life on its timer, a small mercy of routine in a world gone sideways. I shuffled to the kitchen, poured a cup, and stood at the window watching Chicago wake up. Traffic was already building on the expressway in the distance, people heading to jobs, to lives that hadn't been shattered by a phone call yesterday afternoon. My black suit hung in the closet like a uniform for grief. The last time I'd worn it was for Margaret's funeral 3 years ago. The fabric felt heavier now as I lifted it out, weighted with the memory of standing graveside while rain drummed on the umbrella above my head. Margaret would have known what to do about Vivian. She'd always been better at reading people, better at seeing through polished surfaces to the rot beneath. I dressed carefully, adjusting the tie until it sat properly. The mirror reflected a man I barely recognized. Older, grayer, with new lines around the eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Grief aged you instantly, I was learning. One phone call and suddenly you looked every one of your 68 years. The photo albums were stacked in the living room bookshelf, and I found myself pulling out the most recent one. Ronald's illness was documented there in brutal honesty. The gradual weight loss, the way his smile became more forced as treatments failed, the hollow look that settled into his eyes during the final months. But there were also photos of his determination, his refusal to give up, the way he'd kept working even when the cancer tried to steal his strength. Millions of dollars had gone into keeping him alive. Experimental treatments in Germany, clinical trials in Houston, a last-ditch surgery in Boston that had bought him 3 extra months. I'd paid for some of it. Ronald's insurance and business accounts had covered the rest, and Vivian had complained about every penny spent. "We're hemorrhaging money," she'd said during one particularly brutal chemo cycle. "At what point do we accept reality?" Reality. Her favorite word, as if love and hope were luxuries only fools could afford. I closed the album and set it back on the shelf. The photos showed something else, too. Something I'd been too focused on medical reports to notice at the time. In the later pictures, Ronald rarely looked at Vivian directly. When she was in frame at all, there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before his diagnosis. Maybe he'd started seeing through her performance. Maybe that was what she'd meant about him rewriting his will 3 times. The funeral was at 2:00, St. Matthew's Episcopal, the same church where Ronald and Vivian had been married 5 years ago. I'd walked him down the aisle that day, proud and hopeful about his future. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I packed a small bag with essentials and checked my watch. 11:30. Enough time to drive there slowly, maybe stop by the cemetery to see the plot we'd selected. Ronald would be buried next to his mother, in the Bennett family section that went back 4 generations. Vivian would have preferred something more expensive, more ostentatious, but the will Ronald had written before his illness specified exactly where he wanted to rest. At least he'd gotten that right. The garage door rumbled open, and I backed the Buick out into the morning sunshine. Oak Park looked peaceful at this hour. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, the kind of neighborhood where people still waved to each other and borrowed cups of sugar. Ronald had grown up here, learned to ride his bike on these sidewalks, built his first computer in the basement workshop. As I drove toward the expressway, my hands gripped the steering wheel, tighter than necessary. Today I would face Vivian in front of friends, colleagues, and extended family. She would play the grieving widow perfectly, accepting sympathy while mentally cataloging who might be worth cultivating for future business relationships. She would expect me to play along, to maintain the fiction of family unity for appearances. She was going to be disappointed. The traffic moved steadily toward downtown, carrying me toward whatever confrontation awaited. In the rearview mirror, Oak Park grew smaller, but my resolve grew stronger. Vivian thought she'd won by default, that money and lawyers made her untouchable. She was about to learn that some battles couldn't be bought, and some fathers would go to extraordinary lengths to protect their son's memory. The city skyline rose ahead of me, gleaming in the morning sun. Somewhere in that maze of steel and glass, Vivian was probably getting ready too, choosing jewelry expensive enough to signal her new wealth, but tasteful enough to avoid criticism, calculating even in her grief performance. But calculation worked both ways, and I'd had all night to think about mine. I backed out of the driveway slowly, my hands steadier now than they'd been since yesterday's phone call. The morning sun slanted through the oak trees lining Forest Avenue, casting familiar shadows across pavement I'd driven thousands of times. But today felt different. Today I was driving toward war. The route to Graceland Cemetery was etched in my memory, down Harlem Avenue to the Eisenhower, then east toward the city. Traffic moved in its predictable rhythm, commuters heading to offices where they'd complain about meetings and deadlines. Normal problems. Problems that seemed insignificant when measured against burying your son and facing his calculating widow. A medical office building flashed past on my right, its glass facade reflecting the morning light. The sight triggered something sharp in my chest. How many times had I driven Ronald to similar buildings over the past 18 months? How many waiting rooms had we sat in together while Vivian claimed she had prior commitments? I remembered the third chemotherapy session most clearly. Ronald had asked me to drive him because Vivian was getting her hair colored while her husband fought poison with poison, while his body tried to reject the cure that might save his life. I'd sat in that sterile waiting room for 4 hours, watching other families support their loved ones, while wondering where my daughter-in-law had learned such casual cruelty. "Dad, you don't have to stay," Ronald had said when they finally wheeled him out, pale and shaking from the treatment, but his eyes said something different. His eyes said he needed his father because his wife couldn't be bothered to show up. The memory made my jaw clench as I merged onto I-90. A sleek BMW passed me in the left lane, and I found myself wondering if it was similar to the one I'd seen Vivian getting into last month outside the Palmer House Hotel. She'd told Ronald she was meeting with estate planners, but estate planners didn't usually require afternoon meetings at luxury hotels, and they certainly didn't require the kind of intimate body language I'd witnessed from my parking spot across the street. I'd followed her that day, something I'd never imagined myself doing, but something about her excuses had started wearing thin, especially when Ronald's condition was deteriorating, and she seemed more concerned with her social calendar than his treatment schedule. The man she'd met was tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. They'd embraced like lovers, not lawyer and client, and when they'd gone upstairs together, I'd understood exactly what kind of planning was taking place. Luther Hayes. I'd looked him up later, a lawyer, but not the kind who specialized in estate planning, the kind who specialized in getting rich wives out of inconvenient marriages, the kind who probably charged by the hour for more than legal advice. The city skyline grew larger ahead of me, steel and glass towers reaching toward a cloudless sky. Ronald had always loved that view, even as a child. He'd press his face against the car window during family trips downtown, counting skyscrapers and imagining the businesses housed inside them. "Someday I'll have an office up there, Dad," he'd said once, and he had. 37th floor of the Willis Tower, before the cancer made climbing even small hills a challenge. But the memory that hurt most was our last real conversation. 3 weeks before he died, he'd called me at home, his voice weak but purposeful. "Dad, I need you to know something," he'd said, "about Vivian, about what's been happening. Son, you don't need to worry about... No, listen. I know what she's been doing, who she's been seeing." His voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical illness. "I've known for months. I'm taking care of it, though. I'm taking care of everything." I'd wanted to ask more, to offer comfort or advice, but Ronald had changed the subject to my garden and his mother's old rose bushes. Now I understood why. He'd been protecting me even then, shielding me from the full scope of Vivian's betrayal, while he put his own affairs in order. 3 times he'd rewritten his will, Vivian had said. 3 times in his final year. What had he discovered? What had he changed? And why did she seem so confident about inheriting everything if he'd known about her affair? The cemetery gates came into view ahead, wrought iron and limestone marking the entrance to one of Chicago's most prestigious burial grounds. I'd purchased plots there years ago, back when death seemed like a distant concern. Margaret rested there now, and soon Ronald would join her in the Bennett family section. But first, I had to survive whatever performance Vivian had planned for today. She'd want to play the grieving widow for the crowd, accepting condolences while mentally calculating her windfall. She'd expect me to play along, to maintain family dignity for appearances. She was going to be disappointed. Again. I pulled into the parking area and killed the engine. Across the lot, I spotted Vivian's silver Porsche, a car she'd insisted on buying while Ronald was spending his savings on experimental treatments. She was already here, probably holding court near the entrance, accepting sympathy while wearing her grief like expensive jewelry. My hands gripped the steering wheel one final time. Yesterday, she'd shown me her true nature over the phone. Today, she'd tried to humiliate me in public, but she'd underestimated something important about the man she was dealing with. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was a father with a mission. I stepped out of the Buick and straightened my black jacket, scanning the gathering crowd near the cemetery entrance. Early mourners clustered in small groups, their voices subdued against the morning air. And there, positioned like a queen holding court, stood Vivian. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a sleek black dress that managed to be both funeral appropriate and figure flattering, paired with jewelry that caught the sunlight just enough to signal wealth. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman preparing for a photo shoot, not burying her husband. The moment she spotted me walking across the gravel lot, her face transformed. The practiced grief expression melted away, replaced by something predatory. She excused herself from a group of Ronald's former colleagues and strode toward me with deliberate purpose. "Well, well, look who decided to show up." Her voice carried across the space between us, loud enough for nearby mourners to hear. "I hope you're not expecting anything after today, Marvin. The lawyers will make everything very clear." Several people turned at her words, their faces registering surprise at the hostile tone. This wasn't how family members typically addressed each other at funerals, but Vivian either didn't notice or didn't care about the audience she was creating. "I'm here to bury my son," I said quietly, trying to maintain some dignity despite her public attack. Nothing more. "Your son?" She laughed, the sound sharp and unnatural in the cemetery setting. "Ronald outgrew you years ago, old man. He built an empire while you played with property deals in the suburbs. He didn't need his daddy's advice or approval." More heads turned now. Ronald's business associates looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. His former secretary, a kind woman named Patricia, actually stepped backward as if trying to escape the confrontation. "Show some respect," I said, my voice still controlled but with an edge creeping in. "This is your husband's funeral." "Respect?" Vivian's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Like the respect you showed when you questioned every medical decision? Like the respect you showed when you insisted on those expensive treatments that bankrupted us?" Her voice rose higher, drawing more attention. "Ronald finally had peace in his last weeks, because I convinced him to stop listening to your false hope." The words hit like physical blows. She was rewriting history, making it sound like I'd been the one prolonging Ronald's suffering, making it sound like she'd been the voice of compassion while I'd been the unrealistic optimist demanding pointless procedures. "That's not what happened," I said, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Isn't it?" She stepped closer, invading my personal space with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power. "Tell me, Marvin, when was the last time Ronald actually asked for your opinion about anything important? When was the last time he called you first with good news or bad news?" The questions stung because they contained just enough truth to wound. Ronald had been pulling away in his final months, but I'd attributed it to his illness, his struggle with mortality. I'd never considered that his wife might be poisoning him against his own father. "You're pathetic," Vivian continued, her voice dropping to a hiss that only I could hear while maintaining her public performance. "A useless old man clinging to relevance through his son's achievements. Well, guess what? Your son is dead, and you're nobody now. Nobody. The funeral director appeared at my elbow, his professional smile strained with obvious discomfort. Perhaps we should move toward the ceremony area, he suggested diplomatically. The service will begin shortly. Vivian straightened her dress and smiled brilliantly at the man. Of course. We're all eager to celebrate Ronald's life and legacy. She turned back to me with mock sweetness. Aren't we, Marvin? So eager to hear about the wonderful life Ronald built. Without you. She walked away with practiced grace, immediately rejoining her audience of mourners who'd witnessed enough of the exchange to know something was deeply wrong. But they couldn't know the full scope of her cruelty, the calculated way she'd chosen every word to inflict maximum damage. I stood there for a moment, breathing carefully through my nose, trying to regain my composure. The funeral director lingered beside me, clearly uncertain whether further intervention might be necessary. Family tensions, I said quietly, offering him a reassuring nod. Grief affects people differently. But as I watched Vivian accept condolences from people who had no idea what she really was, I made a silent promise. She thought she'd won the opening round with her public humiliation. She thought she could reduce me to a broken old man stumbling through his son's funeral. She was about to learn that some battles were fought over years, not minutes, and some fathers would endure any humiliation to protect their child's memory. The ceremony area beckoned ahead, where I would have to sit through 90 minutes of Vivian's performance, while she systematically tried to destroy what remained of my dignity. But I would endure it, because somewhere in Ronald's carefully rewritten will, somewhere in his final plans, lay the justice I couldn't deliver myself. I just had to survive long enough to see it. The ceremony chairs were arranged in neat rows facing Ronald's photograph, a professional portrait from better days when his face still carried hope instead of the hollow exhaustion cancer had carved there. Mourners filed toward their seats with the careful solemnity appropriate for such occasions, speaking in whispers and avoiding eye contact. Vivian positioned herself with strategic precision, choosing a seat in the second row where she could maintain her widow's prominence while ensuring she sat directly behind me, close enough to continue her whispered campaign of destruction throughout the service. I took my place in the front row, focusing on my son's image, rather than the woman settling herself like a vulture behind my right shoulder. The funeral director made final adjustments to the flower arrangements, expensive displays that Vivian had undoubtedly chosen for their visual impact rather than their meaning. The service began with the minister's gentle words about celebration of life and eternal rest, standard phrases professionally delivered, meaningless in the face of losing a child. I tried to concentrate on memories of Ronald, his excitement over his first computer, his pride when his business went public, his determination to fight an unbeatable disease. Such a shame Ronald never got to enjoy his success, Vivian whispered directly into my ear, her voice so low only I could hear it. All that money he made, all those achievements, and he spent his last months worrying about disappointing his father. I kept my eyes fixed forward, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted, but my hands clenched tighter in my lap. He told me near the end that he felt guilty, she continued, her breath warm against my neck in a mockery of intimacy. Guilty for not being the son you wanted, for not including you in his business decisions, for growing beyond your small-town real estate mentality. Patricia, Ronald's former secretary, stood to deliver a eulogy about his kindness as an employer. She spoke about his commitment to ethical business practices, his insistence on treating employees like family. As she described the man I'd raised, Vivian leaned forward again. Of course, she never saw how he really felt about family obligations, she murmured. How exhausted he was by your constant need for attention, your pathetic attempts to stay relevant in his adult life. My jaw clenched, involuntarily. The woman sitting to my left glanced over with concern, clearly sensing tension but unable to identify its source. I forced myself to relax my posture to maintain the appearance of dignified grief while poison dripped into my ear. Another speaker took the podium, Jimmy Caldwell, Ronald's old college roommate and business partner. He talked about Ronald's integrity, his loyalty to friends, his refusal to compromise his principles even when it cost him profitable deals. Words that painted the picture of a man I'd been proud to call my son. "Funny how Jimmy doesn't mention Ronald's biggest compromise," Vivian whispered, pretending to respect his father's opinions when he'd already decided you were irrelevant. "That took real acting skill, don't you think?" She paused for effect, then delivered her next thrust with surgical precision. "He was relieved when you stopped visiting as often. Told me it was easier to focus on getting well without your constant hovering, without your desperate need to feel useful." The lie was crafted perfectly, containing just enough plausible truth to wound. Ronald had asked me to cut back on visits during his final weeks, but only because the treatments were making him increasingly uncomfortable with company. I'd respected his need for privacy, never suspecting his wife was using my absence to isolate him further. Jimmy finished his remarks and returned to his seat. The minister began reading from Scripture about valleys and shadows, words meant to comfort but falling flat in the face of genuine grief. Other mourners dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Vivian reached across to touch my shoulder in a gesture that would look supportive to observers. "You know what the saddest part is?" she said, her fingers digging into my jacket with false comfort. "Ronald died believing his father loved him. He never realized you just loved the idea of having a successful son to brag about. The reflected glory. The way people looked at you differently when they learned who your son was." My breathing grew shallow. Around us, people shifted in their seats as the service moved toward its conclusion. The minister spoke about resurrection and hope, concepts that felt abstract when your child was the one being buried. "That's why his will is so generous to me," Vivian continued relentlessly. "He knew I loved him for himself, not for what he could do for my reputation, not for the validation he could provide to an aging father desperate to matter." She leaned back then, satisfied with her work. I could hear her adjusting her clothing, preparing for the final phase of her performance. In a few minutes, she would stand and accept condolences with perfect grace, playing the devastated widow while I sat here processing the systematic demolition of my relationship with my son. But as the minister moved toward his closing prayer, I realized something important. Vivian's cruelty was too calculated, too specific. She wasn't just venting grief or striking out randomly. She was working from a script, delivering precisely crafted wounds designed to destroy my confidence before whatever came next, which meant she was afraid of something. Something about today, about the will reading, about information she thought I might possess. Her sustained attack wasn't the behavior of someone completely confident in their position. It was the behavior of someone trying to break their opponent before the real battle began. The service concluded with a benediction and the gentle suggestion that mourners proceed to the graveside. People began standing, gathering purses and adjusting coats. Vivian rose gracefully and immediately began accepting sympathy from nearby attendees, transforming back into the grieving widow with practiced ease. But she'd miscalculated something crucial. She'd assumed her words would leave me broken and defeated. Instead, they'd revealed her desperation, and that knowledge would have to sustain me through whatever came next. Cars pulled away from Graceland Cemetery in a somber procession, but I barely registered the movement around me. The funeral had drained something essential from my core, leaving me hollow as an empty vessel. Vivian's systematic cruelty during the service had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. I felt beaten down, defenseless, ready to accept whatever final humiliation awaited at the lawyer's office. The Willis Tower rose ahead of us like a monument to corporate power, its black glass reflecting the afternoon sun in sharp geometric patterns. 15 minutes of downtown traffic had passed in a blur while I processed the morning's emotional assault. Now we were parking in the underground garage, preparing for the final act of this carefully orchestrated drama. Vivian emerged from her Porsche, looking refreshed rather than grieved, as if the funeral had energized rather than depleted her. She'd reapplied her lipstick and straightened her dress, transforming back into the poised professional woman who'd charmed her way into my son's life 5 years ago. The grieving widow performance was over. Now came the business meeting. Luther Hayes waited for us in the lobby, his silver hair immaculate, and his expensive suit perfectly tailored. He greeted Vivian with the kind of lingering handshake that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their relationship. then offered me a professionally appropriate nod. "My condolences again, Mr. Bennet," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but we'll make the proceedings as painless as possible." The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt endless. Vivian stood close enough to Luther that their shoulders touched, while I occupied the opposite corner, like a defeated old man being escorted to his execution. The floor numbers climbed steadily, 20, 25, 30, each digit marking my progression toward financial ruin. Luther's office occupied a corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. The conference table was polished mahogany, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Everything about the space screamed success, power, authority, the perfect stage for Vivian's final victory. "Please have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Luther said, gesturing toward the chairs, but Vivian had already positioned herself at his right hand, claiming the seat of honor beside the man who would deliver her prize. I took a chair across the table, isolated like a defendant facing judgment. The will documents lay in a neat stack before Luther, bound in blue folders that gave them official weight. He arranged his reading glasses with theatrical precision, cleared his throat, and assumed the grave expression appropriate for such moments. "Before we begin," Vivian said, her voice honey-sweet with false concern, "I want you to know I hold no grudges, Marvin. Ronald's illness was hard on all of us. I understand if you had expectations about his final wishes." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. "But you need to prepare yourself for disappointment. The will is very clear about who inherits the $70 million. Ronald was quite specific about ensuring my financial security after his death." The words hit exactly as intended. My shoulders sagged further. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the chair arms. She was right, of course. Why would Ronald leave anything substantial to his father when he had a young wife to protect? Why would he burden her with the obligation to care for an aging parent? "Shall we proceed?" Luther asked, his voice professionally neutral, but with an undertone of satisfaction. He was about to deliver the performance of his career, reading a document that would make his lover rich, while destroying an old man who'd already lost everything that mattered. I nodded silently beyond speech. Across the table, Vivian's smile grew wider. She'd won completely, first by isolating Ronald from his father, then by humiliating me at his funeral, and now by claiming the fortune that represented my son's life's work. Luther opened the folder with deliberate ceremony, his eyes scanning the first page as if verifying details he'd already memorized. The conference room fell silent except for the distant hum of downtown traffic, 37 floors below. "This is the last will and testament of Ronald James Bennet," he began formally, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "Dated March 15th, 2025. Vivian's breathing quickened slightly. I closed my eyes, preparing for the final blow that would leave me with nothing but memories of the son who'd apparently forgotten his father in his final months. Luther cleared his throat again, preparing to read the document that would complete my destruction. "I, Ronald James Bennet, being of sound mind and disposing memory, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils made by me, and declare this to be my last will and testament." Luther's voice carried perfect authority as he read from the document, each word dropping into the silence like stones into still water. I kept my eyes fixed on my hands, watching them tremble slightly despite my efforts at control. Across the table, Vivian sat perfectly still, but I could feel her satisfaction radiating like heat from a furnace. To my beloved wife, Vivian Catherine Bennet, who has shown such devoted care during my illness and who deserves financial security in her widowhood, I leave all my assets, properties, and monetary inheritance. Luther paused meaningfully. "This includes my technology company shares, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $70 million. The words crashed over me like a physical blow. $70 million. Everything Ronald had built. Everything he'd achieved, flowing to the woman who'd betrayed him while he lay dying. The woman who'd spent his final months planning his funeral and calculating her windfall. Furthermore, Luther continued, his voice growing more confident, I specifically direct that this inheritance not be subject to any family claims or expectations. My wife's financial independence is paramount, and she should feel no obligation to support extended family members who may believe themselves entitled to my estate. Extended family members? The phrase was a knife twisted in the wound. That's how my son had seen me in his final months. Not as the father who'd raised him, not as the man who'd driven him to countless treatments, but as an obligation to be dismissed. Vivian's hand moved to cover her mouth in a gesture of shock, but I caught the flash of triumph in her eyes. She was performing grief while celebrating victory, playing the overwhelmed widow while claiming her prize. There are additional provisions regarding charitable donations and minor bequests, Luther said, flipping through pages with professional efficiency. But the primary inheritance is clear and unambiguous. Mrs. Bennet inherits the entirety of her husband's estate. The conference room felt airless, the windows suddenly seeming more like barriers than openings. Outside, Chicago continued its busy rhythm, people pursuing their lives and dreams while mine collapsed into rubble. Ronald's final judgment had been delivered with legal precision. His father was worth nothing. I need a moment, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Of course, Vivian said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. This must be overwhelming. I know you had hopes. She trailed off delicately, as if sparing my feelings while delivering the final thrust. Luther began organizing his papers with satisfied efficiency. The document has been properly witnessed and notarized. Mrs. Bennet, we can begin the probate process immediately. With an estate this size, there will be some procedural requirements, but nothing complicated. Thank you, Luther, Vivian said warmly. Ronald chose his lawyer well. I'm grateful for your thorough attention to his wishes. The exchange carried undertones that made my stomach turn. Even now, in the moment of their triumph, they couldn't resist subtle references to their collaboration. Luther's thorough attention hadn't been limited to legal documents, and they both knew it. Mr. Bennet, Luther addressed me with professional courtesy tinged with pity, I understand this isn't the outcome you might have hoped for, but I assure you the will is legally binding and reflects your son's considered judgment about his estate. I looked up at him, this silver-haired criminal who'd stolen my son's wife and now his fortune. He really left me nothing? There are small bequests, Luther said, consulting his papers. Some personal items, family photographs, things of sentimental rather than monetary value. But the bulk of the estate. He gestured toward Vivian with apologetic finality. She leaned forward with mock concern. Marvin, I hope you understand this isn't personal. Ronald wanted to ensure my security. He knew I'd given up my career to care for him, that I'd sacrificed my earning potential for his needs. Given up her career, the phrase would have been laughable if it hadn't been so cruel. Her career had consisted of modeling jobs that dried up by her 30s, leaving her hunting for a wealthy husband to support her lifestyle. Ronald had been her salvation, not her sacrifice. The probate process typically takes several months, Luther explained, but given the straightforward nature of this will, we should be able to expedite matters. Mrs. Bennet, you'll have access to immediate funds for expenses, with the full inheritance transferred upon completion. Vivian nodded gracefully. I appreciate your efficiency. Ronald always said you were the most thorough lawyer he'd ever worked with. Always said. Another lie for the pile. Ronald had met Luther through Vivian, had hired him on her recommendation during his illness. The thorough attention had started long before any legal work began. I sat in my chair like a broken man, watching them discuss the dismantling of my son's legacy with professional satisfaction. Everything Ronald had built would flow to his calculating widow, who would probably spend it on luxury vacations and expensive jewelry, while forgetting the man who'd made it possible. The conference room fell quiet as Luther concluded his reading. Outside the windows, afternoon shadows grew longer across the city. Somewhere in those towers and streets, people were building lives and chasing dreams. Mine had just ended in a lawyer's office with the reading of a will that erased me from my son's story. Vivian smiled at me across the polished table, her victory complete. Well, Vivian said, her voice bright with satisfaction, I suppose we should discuss the timeline for... The conference room door burst open with explosive force, slamming against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. Jimmy Caldwell stood in the doorway, his face flushed from running, his tie askew, clutching a manila envelope against his chest like a shield. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the afternoon quiet like a fire alarm. "Don't sign anything. Don't believe them. It's all lies." Luther shot to his feet, his professional composure cracking. "Mr. Caldwell, this is a private legal proceeding. You can't just—" "Private!" Jimmy stepped into the room, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "There's nothing private about conspiracy and fraud." He pointed directly at Luther and Vivian, his hand shaking with anger. "These two have been planning this for months." Vivian's mouth fell open, her carefully maintained widow's composure dissolving into genuine panic. "Jimmy, what are you talking about? You're clearly upset about Ronald's death, but—" "Upset?" Jimmy's voice rose higher, filling the corporate conference room with raw emotion. "I'm upset that you've been screwing this crooked lawyer while my best friend was dying. I'm upset that you forged his will. I'm upset that you're trying to steal everything he worked for." The words hit the room like grenades, each accusation exploding against the polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows. Luther had gone pale, his silver hair suddenly looking less distinguished and more desperate. Vivian gripped her chair arms so tightly her knuckles had turned white. That's an outrageous accusation," Luther stammered, but his voice carried no conviction. "Mr. Caldwell, you're clearly distraught." "Distraught?" Jimmy laughed bitterly, advancing toward the conference table. "You want to know what's distraught? Ronald calling me 3 weeks before he died, telling me about the private investigator he'd hired, telling me about the photos of you two at the Palmer House Hotel, telling me how his loving wife was planning to steal his fortune the moment he stopped breathing." I felt something shift inside my chest, a spark of hope fighting against the crushing weight of despair. Jimmy's words were landing with the force of truth, each detail too specific to be fabrication. "You're lying," Vivian said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "Ronald never suspected anything. He trusted me completely." "Trusted you?" Jimmy pulled a photograph from his envelope and slammed it onto the conference table. "Then explain this picture of you and lover boy here in a hotel room last month. Explain the credit card records showing lunch dates while Ronald was getting chemotherapy. Explain the phone records showing 2-hour conversations with Luther while your husband was fighting for his life." Luther lurched forward, reaching for the photograph, but Jimmy snatched it back. "Don't even think about it, counselor. I've got copies of everything: bank records, hotel receipts, phone logs, and most importantly—" He held up a sealed envelope with trembling fingers. "A copy of Ronald's real will, the one he wrote after he found out about your affair." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the windows, Chicago sprawled in afternoon sunlight, oblivious to the drama playing out 37 floors above the street. But inside this conference room, the carefully constructed world of lies was collapsing with devastating precision. "That's impossible," Vivian whispered. "I watched him write his final will. I was there when he signed it." "You were there when he signed a fake," Jimmy said, his voice dropping to something harder and more dangerous. "He'd already written the real one and hidden it with me, because he knew exactly what kind of woman he'd married. He knew you'd try to steal everything the moment he was too weak to stop you." Luther's professional mask had completely disintegrated. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and his hands shook as he tried to organize the fake documents. "This is all speculation. The will I read is properly witnessed, and—" "Witnessed by your secretary and your paralegal," Jimmy interrupted, "both of whom, I'm betting, have no idea they were participating in forgery. Both of whom will sing like birds when the FBI starts asking questions about document fraud and conspiracy." FBI, the word hung in the air like a death sentence. Vivian had gone completely white, her carefully applied makeup standing out against her pale skin like war paint on a corpse. I found my voice for the first time since Jimmy's explosive entrance. "The real will? What does it say?" Jimmy turned toward me, his expression softening slightly. "It says that Ronald loved his father. It says he knew you'd always supported him, even when he was too sick and suspicious to appreciate it. And it says he wanted to make sure justice was served if anything happened to him." The manila envelope in Jimmy's hands suddenly seemed to contain more than legal documents. It contained vindication, justice, and the knowledge that my son hadn't forgotten his father after all. "You can't prove any of this," Vivian said desperately. "Ronald's dead. Whatever you think you know." "I know plenty," Jimmy said quietly. "I know about the fake cancer treatment receipts Luther helped you create to hide the money you were stealing. I know about the offshore accounts you set up in preparation for his death. I know about the life insurance policies you took out without Ronald's knowledge." Each revelation hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about inheritance fraud. It was about systematic theft from a dying man who'd trusted his wife to care for him. Luther made a sudden movement toward the door, but Jimmy stepped sideways, blocking his escape. "Going somewhere, counselor? I don't think so. We're going to sit right here until the authorities arrive, because I called them from the lobby, and they should be here any minute." The sound of footsteps in the hallway confirmed Jimmy's words. Heavy, purposeful steps that could only belong to law enforcement officers ascending to deliver justice to a room that had seen too much deception. Vivian looked at Luther with desperate eyes, but he was staring at his hands like a man watching his life dissolve. Their conspiracy was unraveling with the speed and inevitability of an avalanche, and somewhere in that manila envelope, my son's true voice was waiting to be heard. "We need independent verification," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. Jimmy's revelations had ignited something inside me, transforming shock into determination. "I want a document expert to examine both wills. Now." Luther's face had gone ashen, his silver hair looking less distinguished and more desperate with each passing minute. "Mr. Bennett, that's completely unnecessary. The will I read is properly notarized and—" "Forged," Jimmy interrupted, pulling out his phone. "I already called someone. Dr. Sarah Chen from Northwestern's Forensic Document Lab. She's 5 minutes away." Vivian shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely. "This is ridiculous. You can't just waltz in here with wild accusations and—" "Watch me," Jimmy said quietly. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of downtown traffic. Luther kept shuffling papers like a man rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship, while Vivian paced near the windows, her expensive heels clicking against the marble floor in an agitated rhythm. Dr. Chen arrived with professional efficiency, carrying a leather case that reminded me of a medical bag. She was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of scientific authority that made Luther visibly nervous. "Mr. Caldwell briefed me on the situation," she said, setting her case on the conference table. "I understand there are questions about document authenticity. May I see the contested will?" Luther hesitated, his hand hovering over the blue folder. "I'm not sure this is legally appropriate without proper—" "Hand it over," I said, my patience finally exhausted, "unless you have something to hide." Dr. Chen examined the document with methodical precision, using magnifying equipment and specialized lighting from her case. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught her eyebrows rising slightly as she studied the signature area. "Interesting," she murmured, making notes on a tablet. "The ink composition appears inconsistent with the paper date. And this signature?" She looked up at Luther with sharp eyes. "When exactly did you witness this document being signed?" "March 15th, Luther said automatically, then caught himself. "I mean, that's the date listed on the—" "The ink analysis suggests this signature was made no earlier than last week," Dr. Chen said calmly. "Possibly within the last few days. Would you care to explain that discrepancy?" Vivian's pacing stopped abruptly. Luther's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, clearly searching for an explanation that wouldn't incriminate him further. "There's more," Jimmy said, producing a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Ronald gave me this 3 weeks before he died. His real will, witnessed by his doctor and his accountant, both men who had no reason to lie." Dr. Chen examined the envelope seal with professional interest. "This appears intact. The paper stock is different from the questioned document, and the age characteristics are consistent with the claim date." "We need to verify its contents," I said. "Is there a way to access Ronald's bank records? He mentioned keeping important documents in his safety deposit box." Jimmy nodded. "I have authorization. Ronald made me a backup executor specifically for this situation. He suspected Vivian might try something after he died. The trip to First National took 15 minutes, our unlikely procession moving through downtown Chicago like a legal parade. Dr. Chen rode with me, her equipment case secured in my back seat, while Jimmy followed in his Honda. Vivian and Luther brought up the rear in her Porsche, both looking like condemned prisoners being escorted to their execution. The bank manager, a nervous man named Peterson, verified Jimmy's authorization with multiple phone calls and computer checks. Ronald had indeed named Jimmy as backup executor, with specific instructions that his safety deposit box be opened in case of suspected document fraud. Your son was very thorough, Peterson told me as we descended to the vault level. He updated these instructions just 6 weeks ago during his final office visit. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Jimmy had promised, a sealed envelope marked Final Will and Testament in Ronald's careful handwriting, along with a separate letter addressed to me personally. Dr. Chen supervised the opening process, documenting everything with photographs and careful chain of custody procedures. As she broke the seal on the will envelope, Vivian made one last desperate attempt. "Whatever that says, it doesn't matter," she said, her voice cracking with strain. Ronald was on heavy medication toward the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. "Actually," Dr. Chen said, examining the document, "this will was prepared and executed according to Illinois state law requirements, properly witnessed, notarized, and legally binding." She looked up at me with something approaching a smile. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to know what your son really wanted?" I nodded, afraid to trust my voice. Across the small vault room, Vivian's face had gone completely white. Luther stood frozen, probably calculating his chances of fleeing the country before the criminal charges were filed. "I think," Dr. Chen said, "we should return to the office for a proper reading. This document deserves the same formal respect that was given to the forgery." As we walked back toward the elevators, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Tuesday afternoon. Hope, real hope, backed by evidence and professional verification. Behind me, I could hear Vivian and Luther whispering desperately to each other, their conspiracy collapsing with each step toward the truth. Back in Luther's conference room, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Dr. Chen sat at the head of the table where Luther had presided over his fraudulent reading, the authentic will spread before her like evidence in a courtroom. I took the seat closest to her, while Jimmy positioned himself across from our defeated conspirators. Vivian looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Her perfect makeup had smudged from nervous touching, and her hands trembled as she gripped her chair arms. Luther stared at his expensive desk as if memorizing it, probably realizing this might be his last day practicing law. "This document," Dr. Chen began formally, "has been verified as authentic through multiple forensic techniques. The signature is genuine, the witnesses are legitimate, and the execution meets all Illinois legal requirements." She cleared her throat. "Mr. Bennett, your son's final will and testament reads as follows." My heart hammered against my ribs as she continued. "I, Ronald James Bennett, being of sound mind and having discovered the betrayal of my marriage, do hereby revoke all previous wills. To my beloved father, Marvin Bennett, who supported me through my illness while my wife pursued her own interests, I leave my entire estate valued at approximately $70 million. The words hit Vivian like physical blows. She gasped, then began shaking her head frantically. "No, no, that's impossible. Ronald loved me. He wouldn't—" "There's more," Dr. Chen said, her voice cutting through Vivian's denial. Quote, "My wife, Vivian, forfeited any claim to my estate through her adultery with my attorney Luther Hayes, whom I trusted to handle my affairs honestly. Their betrayal during my illness demonstrates their unfitness to inherit anything I built through honest work." Luther's face had gone gray. Professional ruin was staring him in the face, along with potential criminal charges that could end his career permanently. Dr. Chen continued reading. "Furthermore, I direct my father to pursue all legal remedies against any parties who attempt to defraud my estate through forged documents or false claims. I have provided evidence of such anticipated fraud to my friend James Caldwell, who I trust to ensure justice is served." The room fell silent except for Vivian's increasingly labored breathing Then suddenly she collapsed to her knees beside her chair, her composure finally shattering completely. "Please," she sobbed, reaching toward me with desperate hands. "Marvin, you have to understand. I was scared. Ronald was dying, and I didn't know what would happen to me. I panicked and made terrible choices." The tears might have been genuine, but the manipulation underneath them was transparent. Even in defeat, she was calculating, trying to find an angle that might save her from complete ruin. "I'll give you half," she continued desperately. "We can work something out. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't press charges, please." I looked down at this woman who'd tormented me through my son's funeral, who'd whispered poison during his memorial service, who'd stolen from him while he lay dying. The old Marvin might have felt pity, but the man I'd become through this ordeal felt only justice. "Ronald made his wishes clear," I said quietly. "He knew exactly what kind of person you are, and so do I." Luther finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "Mr. Bennett, surely we can reach some understanding. I was manipulated by Mrs. Bennett. She convinced me that Ronald wanted—" "You forged legal documents," Jimmy interrupted. "You violated your oath as an attorney. You conspired to defraud a dying man's estate." He pulled out his phone. "The FBI is very interested in white-collar crime, especially when it involves lawyers." The next few minutes blurred together in a series of official procedures. Dr. Chen documented everything for her report. Jimmy called the authorities he'd been coordinating with throughout our investigation. I signed papers acknowledging my inheritance, while Luther and Vivian sat in stunned silence, watching their carefully planned heist dissolve into criminal liability. As the legal machinery began grinding into motion around us, I opened the personal letter Ronald had left me. His handwriting was weaker than I remembered, probably from the medications, but his message was crystal clear. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means my suspicions about Vivian were correct. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive. I was trying to protect you from the pain of knowing how completely I'd been deceived, but I wanted you to know that your love and support meant everything to me. Use this inheritance wisely, and know that justice has been served. Your son, Ronald." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my jacket pocket, next to my heart. Across the table, Vivian was still crying, but her tears had turned bitter and self-pitying. Luther was making frantic phone calls, probably to criminal defense attorneys. "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Chen said, gathering her equipment, "the inheritance transfer will take some time to process through probate, but there's no question about your legal standing. Your son planned very carefully to protect his true wishes." As we prepared to leave Luther's office for the final time, I realized something important had shifted inside me. The crushing grief was still there, but it no longer felt like defeat. Ronald had protected me even in death, ensuring that justice would prevail over greed and betrayal. The last thing I saw before the elevator doors closed was Vivian staring at her hands in defeat, probably calculating how much money she'd need for legal fees instead of planning her luxurious future. Justice, it turned out, was sweeter than revenge could ever be. September sunshine filtered through the windows of my Oak Park kitchen as I read the Morning Tribune over coffee, a ritual that had finally returned to something resembling peace. 4 months had passed since that confrontation in Luther's office, and the legal system had worked with surprising efficiency once the evidence was clear. Vivian's conviction had made the business pages, 3 years for conspiracy to commit fraud, plus another 2 for the life insurance policies she'd secretly taken out on Ronald during his illness. The judge had been particularly harsh about her exploitation of a dying man's trust. Her appeals had been denied, her assets seized to pay legal fees, and her return to modeling had proven as pathetic as expected. At 40 with a criminal record, the industry had no interest in her desperation. Luther's sentence was harsher, 5 years federal prison for document forgery and violation of professional ethics. His law license had been permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed so thoroughly that even his former colleagues refused to acknowledge they'd known him. I'd heard through Jimmy that he was serving his time in a minimum security facility downstate, probably calculating how many years remained before he could attempt to rebuild some kind of life. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd conspired to steal $70 million and ended up with nothing but orange jumpsuits and criminal records. Meanwhile, I'd discovered that wealth, when earned through justice rather than greed, carried different responsibilities. The first thing I'd done was establish the Ronald Bennett Cancer Research Foundation, donating $20 million to fund the experimental treatments that might help other families avoid our tragedy. Northwestern Memorial now had a wing dedicated to innovative cancer therapies, with Ronald's photo in the lobby showing him at his best. Young, hopeful, building his first computer company. The house felt different now, too. I'd made some improvements. A new kitchen, updated heating system, fresh paint, but kept the essential character intact. This was still the home where Ronald had learned to ride his bike and built his first computer. Luxury for the sake of luxury held no appeal when I'd seen what it did to people like Vivian. Jimmy had become a regular visitor, helping me navigate the technical aspects of the foundation and occasionally joining me for the golf games we'd planned before Ronald's death. He'd never accepted any payment for his crucial role in exposing the conspiracy, claiming that friendship couldn't be bought. But I'd quietly arranged for his daughter's college fund to receive a substantial boost, ensuring she'd graduate debt-free. Mr. Bennett? The voice belonged to Sarah Martinez, the Foundation's program director. She'd called to update me on the latest research grants we'd approved. The University of Chicago team thinks they've identified a promising new approach to pancreatic cancer treatment. Early trials are showing remarkable results. Fund it, I said immediately, whatever they need. That was the thing about having money for the right reasons. Every dollar spent on research, every breakthrough that might help another family, felt like honoring Ronald's memory in the way he would have wanted. Not through marble monuments or expensive buildings with our name on them, but through practical action that might prevent other fathers from getting that terrible phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. The garden had become my refuge during the difficult months of legal proceedings and media attention. Ronald's mother's rose bushes were thriving under my renewed care, their blooms more vibrant than they'd been in years. I'd added new plantings, too, a small memorial section with flowers that bloomed at different times throughout the year, ensuring something was always growing in Ronald's honor. As I worked among the roses that evening, I thought about the letter I'd received from a family in Wisconsin. Their 28-year-old son had been diagnosed with the same aggressive pancreatic cancer that had taken Ronald. But thanks to research funded by our foundation, he was receiving treatments that hadn't existed a year ago. His prognosis was good. That letter, more than any bank statement or legal document, proved that justice had truly been served. The phone rang as darkness settled over Oak Park. I almost didn't answer, preferring the quiet of my garden to whatever business might require attention, but something made me check the caller ID. Mr. Bennett? The voice was young, nervous. This is Dr. Patel from the research team at University of Chicago. I know it's late, but I wanted to tell you personally. The treatment protocol your foundation funded, we've just had our first complete remission. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer completely eliminated. I sat down heavily on the garden bench Ronald had built for his mother years ago. Somewhere in Chicago, a family was learning that their nightmare might have an ending different from ours, and Ronald, in his wisdom and planning, had made that possible. Doctor, I said, my voice thick with emotion, please send me everything you need for the next phase. We're going to beat this thing. After hanging up, I remained in the garden as night settled around me. The city lights twinkled in the distance, cars moving along their predictable routes, people heading home to families and lives that might now have different possibilities because of what we'd built from tragedy. Vivian had wanted money for luxury and status. Luther had wanted it for power and indulgence. But Ronald, even in death, had shown me what wealth could really accomplish when guided by love instead of greed. I touched the letter in my pocket, the one he'd written knowing he wouldn't survive to see justice done. His final gift hadn't just been the inheritance, it had been the opportunity to transform pain into purpose, loss into legacy. The roses rustled softly in the evening breeze, and for the first time since that terrible Tuesday phone call, I felt genuinely at peace. Justice wasn't just about punishment for those who'd done wrong. It was about ensuring that good could triumph from the ashes of betrayal, that love could outlast even death, and that a father's final act could protect not just his own family, but countless others facing the same fight. Ronald would have been proud. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.